Welcome. In this video, we're going to talk about ways to enhance our memory. So we're going to recognize and discuss some memory enhancing strategies that you can apply, and then also some study techniques as well. Now, while we've talked about rehearsal earlier in the chapter, we're going to now discuss different types of rehearsal. And rehearsal is, as we said earlier, it's used for keeping information into short-term memory and hopefully getting it into long-term memory. Now, it seems as if for most hearing people, we favor speech for encoding information, which means either speaking it out loud or to oneself. And again, think of a rehearsal as, people who are rehearsing for a play or rehearsing for choir performance or rehearsing for a band performance, right? They're practicing that information over and over again. And there's different strategies for rehearsal. So one is maintenance rehearsal. And this is what students most often think of when they think of rehearsal, is that rote repetition of material in order to maintain its availability in memory. So when you use flashcards or you read over your notes, that's maintenance rehearsal, right? You're just repeating that information over and over again. Now, it's really good for keeping information in short-term memory, but not necessarily getting it into long-term memory, or it's much more susceptible to that cue-dependent forgetting because all the cues you have are just what's in if you're using a definition. So a very simplistic example would be when you hear a phone number or an address over the phone or look it up in a phone book, and then you repeat it to yourself over and over again until you can write that number down or dial it. And so the writing it down or dialing it would be an extra step to help encode it and get it into long-term memory. But often if you're interrupted when you're repeating that number over and over again, once you turn your attention back to that number, you're going to have forgotten it because just repeating it over and over again wasn't enough to get it into that long-term memory bank. Now, elaborative rehearsal, on the other hand, involves associating this new information with already stored knowledge. And we've talked about this a little bit before, right? The analysis of this new information makes it more memorable. So again, in that example that we had, just associating a word or giving meaning to a word as pleasant or unpleasant, giving it a U or P, that was a little bit of an elaborate rehearsal, right? You're associating this new word with whether you like or dislike that item, right? And so that makes it a little bit more memorable. Again, processing the meaning rather than simply the physical or sensory features of the stimulus. And this is going to prolong the retention of the information. So this is one of the things that, I'm going to try to get you to do throughout the semester, whether it's coming up with your own examples for something, not just learning and memorizing definitions, but finding examples, adding meaning to it, associating the things that we're learning in class with your own personal experiences. Now, a memory strategy that's commonly used are mnemonic devices. So these are little strategies or tricks that help improve memory using a verse or a formula of some sort. They really are good at helping retain and retrieve information because these mnemonics give you extra cues. And so you're not going to be as susceptible to that cue-dependent forgetting. Now, while it does really help get that information into long-term memory, it helps make more connections with different categories in your brain that are already there, it may not help you understand it. So you have to understand what you're learning before you use the mnemonic to help you remember it. So we're going to talk about 3 different types: acronyms, rhymes and catchphrases, and the method of loci. So here's some examples of different acronyms if you're not sure what an acronym is to help you remember things. So kids prefer cheese over fried green spinach. It's a little saying that's easier to remember than kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. So often in a biology class, instructors will give this acronym to help you. So if you can remember kids prefer cheese over fried green spinach, then you have those letters, the first letters of the word, that might help trigger the memory of what the actual word is. Or here's another one if you're musically inclined: every good boy does fine, for notes on the treble clef. Here it says every good boy deserves food. It's a little different spin on it. Rhymes and catchphrases. This is another useful mnemonic device. Some examples might be I before E except after C. Maybe that helps you with spelling. I know it helps me. Of course, there are lots of exceptions to the rule, of course. Here's another one. I actually didn't know this one until I started teaching this class many years ago, of course, but I had never heard this. But 30 days, half November, April, June, and September of 28 is but 1. All the remnant are 31. So it's like a little rhyme, right? So it helps you remember if you want to know the days. There's also something to do with your fingers, or you can count. There's different ways, but And the ABC songs. So singing out ABCs, that is a rhyme that helps little children learn their alphabet and the order of the letters, learn what the letters are. Of course, again, if you think about the ABC song, it does tell them the order of the letters. Maybe it helps them identify letters if they're pointing to them as they're singing the song, but it doesn't necessarily tell them the proper sound to make with the letters or understanding what happens when those letters are put together. So that's a good example of where a mnemonic is a good memory cue, but not necessarily helping in understanding the material. Now, this is one that a lot of students have never heard of before. It's called the method of loci. And so this is where you mentally position things to remember in a well-known room. Now, this is actually when I was an undergrad, my introduction to experimental methods class, I did a research project using the method of loci to see if it would help people remember things better. And then we looked at spatial memory because there's a spatial aspect to the method of loci to see if people had better spatial abilities, were able to better remember things using the method of loci. And we also looked at gender as well. Here's an example of the method of loci. Often it's used for very simplistic lists. Maybe you have a list of things you need at the grocery store for a party, but you don't have any paper to write it down. And you could just keep repeating it over and over in your head. But again, we've learned that rote repetition, that maintenance rehearsal, if our attention is divided and we are called away from repeating that over and over again, it may not have gotten into our long-term memory. What people do is for the method of loci, you take a well-known room, and let's say this is your living room. This is not my living room. It's just a living room I found on the internet. But let's say this is, you picture your living room and you think, okay, I'm going to associate soda with the sliding glass doors, candles with the couch, cake with the coffee table, chips with the chair, and then I think we're missing balloons here. It's blacked out for some reason with the fireplace. And so then you picture those words with those different parts. You get to the store, you picture that room, and you can then remember all the items on your list. So the question students often have is how to study effectively. And so again, one of the things you want to do is use that elaborative rehearsal we've talked about. It will create more levels of processing, deeper levels of processing, provide more cues for you to remember the information. We've also talked about making personal associations. This is often called the self-reference effect. Again, this is going to provide you with deeper level of processing and more cues to help recall the information. Use what's called distributed practice. So which means have shorter study sessions. Don't cram. Okay, you want to have shorter study sessions. Even for this class, don't wait until Sunday to do all of the work. Take some time each day or 2 days a week. Think of this as, instead of being an online class, as being an in-person class where you would go for an hour and 25 minutes twice a week and sit there and listen to the lecture. So break it up. Don't try to cram it all in one day. Also, don't do what my nephew does and walk around the house with the videos on his phone listening to them, because there's a lot of visuals to help you remember the information. Repetition. So some places say that you need to repeat things about 3 times in order to remember them, whether that's rereading your notes, making flashcards. But you might need more than 3 times to remember something. Maybe if you make a personal association, you need less than 3 times. Use those mnemonic devices we talked about. It may not help you understand the material, but it will help you create connections and more cues. And study distraction free. Put those phones away. When you have that divided attention, it really does keep you from learning the material. There's a lot of research out there. It's not called multitasking. We really aren't able to multitask. We can walk and talk at the same time, but when you're sitting there with your phone next to you and studying, watching a video, having your textbook there, that's 3 different tasks. It's not dual tasking, it's triple tasking, right? So dual tasking is when you're studying on your computer and you have your phone there and maybe you have it's just texts that are distracting you, or maybe you have some sort of game you're playing or whatever it is, but you're turning your attention between 2 different things. So you're either going to have to study longer to remember the material, or you're going to miss out on things. So study distraction free. And again, going back to the distributed practice, like when you cram and you don't study and you study all night long, remember how we talked about in stage 2, those sleep spindles suggest synaptic changes are occurring. So you need an adequate amount of sleep to get whatever you studied, to get that into your brain and for your brain to hold on to those memories. So sleep is important.